So hi everyone, in this video I will show you how you can use sprite animations with Froobit framework, and this is a live example which you can find on ovum.io/Froobit/walking. So if you go a level back, you can also visit other examples, but today we will try to reproduce this behavior with Froobit framework. So basically, if you click a key on the keyboard, the character starts moving, and when you release the key, character is again not moving. And also you can notice that background is also moving, and it appears to be infinite, but in a second I will show you what we actually use as assets. So I will open assets folder, and this is our background. So it's the framework is actually taking care of this infinite behavior and sliding, of course. And our main character has two states actually. So the first state is when the character is standing still. Actually, it's not standing still, but he's not changing his position relative to the background image. And this is the first sprite, and the second sprite is this one. So this sprite is for the character movement. And why don't we just open our main.js file, which is an entry point, and we initialize the framework. So let's first import the framework from Froobit core. So we initialize the framework. Actually, we initialize our application, our game, by calling framework with. And since we don't have controllers yet, just empty array, and we call init. And now we can start webpack dev server with npm run dev command. So yeah, it appears that our application is now compiled and running. And let me open developer console. So we can see the message that the framework is initialized. So let me just restart again this. Framework is initialized, and we have an empty canvas. So everything looks fine. So why don't we just start with creating a background. So this will be the first element that we will create. And to create a background, we have to create entity and the controller for the background, and then we have to register controller in here. So let me just make this more obvious. So we have controllers array, and we pass this array here, okay? And we also have options, which is an object, and this is the second parameter to the width method. We're not going to create background entity and controller manually. We're going to use Froo tool. So you basically say Froo create background, and our entity and controller are created. So here we have everything ready. Basically, we can start using P5.js functionalities. So I will just create a dark gray background, and let me just check this. If I register background controller here, after this is recompiled, we should see a dark background. So it was that easy. But in the example, we can see that this scene actually is smaller, a lot smaller, because this is by default the canvas is full screen mode, and we can specify an option which is a scene, and we can set width and height, and I'm setting those values based on my background image so that it covers the whole canvas. And before we actually call this method, we need to include it from the framework. So after I save this, we can see that now we have a canvas which is something like this one, but it doesn't have the background like in the image, and we will take care of that later. Let us now proceed with creating our character. So same as before, we call through create. So this is our character. Our character is actually a sprite animation. Let's go to main.js and let's define our assets. Let's import our assets. So here we can go and say import PNG, and this is idle state, so when the character is not moving, and we have walking state. And now we can just say images. So this is how you import assets into Froobit framework. You basically say images, and then you just say which assets do you want. So idle and walking. And what we do with this, we add it to options. And I'm probably going to change this in the future. It shouldn't be in options, but current implementation is working this way. So not a big deal. Let's go back to our character now, and we can actually create our animations right now. We can override initialize method. And we can say that we have animations. Actually, let's bind this to the object that we're working on, animations. And we have idle animation, and let me just import Sprite's utility from the core, and we can use sprites, and it should have a create animation method which accepts our asset. And now you're probably wondering, where is our asset? Well, our asset is here, so we can use destructuring. So this is how you take your assets, and then you can say idle, and the second parameter is actually how many states do you have in one sprite. So in this sprite we have 2 states, and in this second sprite we have 6 states. So let's get back here to our character, and for idle we have 2 states, and one thing I forgot is to give it a p instance, reference to the p instance. And also here walking, you can just say walking, and we have 6 states. So based on these numbers, the framework will know how to make your animation. So that's basically it. We can run our animations by just saying this animations, and we can pick any. So idle, run. So this is how we actually run our animations. Now let's go to main file and let's register character controller. So I just imported character controller, and we should be able to see our character shortly. So yeah, you can see that our character is now in the upper left corner of the screen and is running idle animation. So based on this sprite. Now, in order to reproduce this same example, we will need to reposition our character down in the middle. So we can go to our character controller, and you can notice that we actually didn't even open those 2 files. We didn't need them before, but now we will work with character controller, and what we need is also we'll need to import a few things from the framework. And for render utility, And now we can let's just say like character is new. So we create our character and we return. We pass our character, and here we can pass before render. So with this in place, we can actually pass a before render callback, and this will be called, as the name says, before the render method of the character entity. And here we can use we can perform p5 translate to move our character to the center. And so let's pick p5 instance. So it's injected, so you can access p5 like this, and then you can use translate and p5 dot height minus 110 pixels. So I'm really just guessing, but we should see that our character is positioned on the bottom. So yeah, now it looks like this. But actually, one more thing before we proceed. I actually moved it by 100 pixels, but it doesn't look like it's 100 pixels, and this is because our character is being rendered from the top left corner. So we can change this by just calling p image mod p center like this. So it will be rendered from the center, and now it really looks like in this example. Now let's enable animation switching. Basically, we have to switch animations when something happens, when user clicks key. So for that purpose, we will initialize our Boolean variable in the constructor. And yeah, basically we can ask here if this is walking, then we run walking animation, else we run idle animation. And I will just do it like this. And yeah, everything should work the same. If when this reloads, our character should still be in the idle state. And if I change this to true, we check our character. Yeah, our character is now running, but this toggling of this Boolean variable will be done from the outside, and for now let's leave it to false. And let's add one more method, toggle walking. So basically this method will just toggle this variable. Okay. And so when do we actually toggle our walking? So when somebody presses a key on a keyboard, so how you actually listen for keyboard, mouse events, and other types of events in Froobit, you can use on event function, actually a subscribe function from this arguments, controller arguments, and you can basically do something like this on event, and now we can say keyboard key pressed, and yeah, key released. So we have to cover those two cases. We will do the same thing on both. So if the key is pressed, we will just toggle character walking. I'll do that, and we do the same thing here. So now our character is basically bind to keyboard events. So if I come here and press, for example, space, the character is moving, and if I release, the character is in the idle state again. So that would be it for the character part, and now we move to our background. Our background right now is just a plain entity, plain Froobit entity with render, which renders background, but we will use predefined entities with superpowers, I like to say. So we have entities object inside the framework, and it contains some predefined entities which you can use, like this one. So it actually has a render method defined, so we don't have to do anything with render, but we have to provide an asset for the background, and we do that by overriding resolve function. So our resolve function accepts all assets, and we have to tell this entity which asset to use. So we'll just return assets bg, and we need to actually import that asset. So you just add it like this, and yeah, you can just like that, and it's actually JPG format. And yeah, this line and this line, it's asset loading, complete asset loading. And now you can see that something is happening. We don't have a working example. We have some kind of error here. Well, this is because we are using another type of entity, a predefined entity from the framework, and we need to go to background controller and do some things to make this work. So first of all, we need to import constants from the framework, and we need to instantiate the background with a translation direction. So our background, as you can see in this example, has to move in one direction, so horizontally, no vertical movement. So let's go back here and let's instantiate with this. Background translate, horizontal should be there, yeah. And one more thing that we need to use, so I will now use framework instance for this purpose, and I will also use compose. So whenever you want to add some additional functionality which is provided by the framework to your controller, you can use composition. So we will now export default compose, and here you can say something like framework, and this actually stands for higher order controller. So we actually have controller which takes care of this movement, so it actually controls our background, and it's called dynamic background. And we have to wrap our base controller like this. So right now you can see that we have the background like in this example, and our character is here. But if we press the key, the background is not moving, it's static. So what we need to do, we need to somehow listen for events that happen on the keyboard and then change what happens with the background. And let me show you. We can basically listen for the same events, but we can also trigger events or actions from another controller, and this is what I'm going to do here. So I will use trigger method, and here I will trigger start walking, and here I will trigger end walking. Now if we go back to background controller, the method which we use for subscriptions is called accept, and you can basically listen for events. So you say start moving, let me just check, start walking, actually start walking, and you basically define what is your behavior when this happens, and we have to subscribe to end walking as well. Now that we have those two listeners in place, how do we actually change the behavior of the background? Well, the second parameter of the controller is state object, which has two methods, get state and set state, and we're going to use only one in this example, set state for now. And it will be in the documentation, but for dynamic background higher order controller, you have a velocity property which you can set. So we can use set state, and we can paste velocity, and we also need p5, so you just take it like this, and we create vector. So since this is only a horizontal movement in one direction, you basically can say something like this. So x value is something like, for example, 2, and epsilon is 0. And for end walking, we will do just 0 vector. But let's go now to the example and let's press the key. Now you can see that our background is moving as well, and this really looks good. But if I release the key, our character is now idle, but the background is still moving, and we need to fix that. So we can just paste this and say that the velocity is actually 0. Now, okay, now if you press the key, the character is moving. If you release the key, the character is not in an idle state, and the background is static again. So yeah, basically this is the example that we wanted to make, and that will be this will be it for this tutorial. Thank you for watching, and see you next one.